إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم يأتي على الناس زمان الصابر فيهم على دينه كالقابض على الجمر أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد. The world that we live in has no shortage of problems, and specifically problems for us as Muslims. The new Gregorian calendar began, and almost immediately the conversation in the media at large became about Islam, Muslims, and it seems to continue. There's a discourse that occurs every single time, and it's not an accident. But when these types of things happen, it makes the world feel constricted. That when people seem to be talking about something about which they have no true idea, and speaking about it in a way, something that you hold so close to your heart that it is the very foundation of your identity, that people start talking about this in a way that is clearly misinformed. But it seems like there's nothing you can do. And from there it leads forward into further issues, further problems. People begin to act out. You begin to see the worst, the dredges of society begin to try and cause problems in physical ways. You begin to see other forms of violence. And it's always a cycle. These things happen, there's a conversation, people become radicalized, and as a result, you begin to fear for your own safety as a Muslim. So when you hear these things and you feel this tension, when we start to wonder, what is it that's going on in the world? Why is it that we as Muslims have to deal with this? Are we doing anything crazy? Are we doing anything strange? All we are doing is professing La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. We're trying to live our daily lives and that's it. Why do people always need to get on our case about it? Why do I need to feel threatened as a Muslim for this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us through the Quran. You know, when we open it, when we take the time to engage with it, He teaches us how to better deal with times like this. By reminding us that nations came before us. Those who were Muslim before the title of Muslim was given by Ibrahim alayhi salam. Those who had lived a life in subservience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking only to do what He had commanded, those people also dealt with so many issues. And when we look at their example, and when we see what it is that they went through, it gives us the ability to contextualize our own problems. To look at them in the lens of, you know what, I know it's tough, and there's no denying that things aren't easy, but at the same time it could be worse. And the most famous example of this, quite honestly, is Banu Israel. And to understand first, we need to recognize the history of Banu Israel. And I want you to understand, I'm not talking about anything to do with our modern landscapes when I say Banu Israel. I'm not talking about anything to do with our modern ideas of religion. What I'm speaking of, first and foremost, begins with Israel alayhi salam, which was the name of Yaqub alayhi salam. Yaqub alayhi salam, Jacob in English, the other name that he had was Israel. And he had 12 sons. Of them, Yusuf alayhi salam, we know. But there are others as well. And those 11 others along with Yusuf alayhi salam, those 12 tribes, those 12 sons, each of them, when they began their own families, became an individual tribe. And then that carried forward. You can do the very simple math. If you have 12 sons, and each of those sons has sons, then each of those sons has sons, you're going to very quickly reach a point where you are literally a tribe, an usbah. You have some strength, you have some numbers to you. And as a result, the Banu Israel were established in Misr, in Egypt, with Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf alayhi salam, the story we know where he became the minister, he led them through the famine, and then his father came to him, and he was able to settle with him. His brothers settled with him, and then the Banu Israel, the tribe of Israel, the sons of Israel, and their progeny, their descendants, they all were settled in Egypt. But as time passed, what began to occur was that the Banu Israel reached a low level in society because of their faith, because of the fact that they were God-conscious people, righteous people, many of them. Because of this, they began to be looked down on in society, particularly in the society that considered the Pharaoh to be a deity, the Pharaoh to be their God. And they began to reach, instead of being at the high stations of society, they reached the lowest levels of it. And when Fir'aun, who we know was the greatest tyrant who ever lived, when he came to power, this is the situation he came to power in. And what he did was only to further diminish and demean them. And he put them lower and lower. And then while he was in power, he has a dream. And this dream is that when it's interpreted, that a child, a boy from Banu Israel will come and he will defeat Fir'aun. He will remove him from his position. And then the Pharaoh implements a policy for Banu Israel. Now, again, reflect on this to contextualize our struggles today. The Pharaoh implemented a policy that in one given year, the boys of every single mother of Banu Israel, every single boy born to a Banu Israeli mother was going to be killed. And there are certain narrations that speak of the horror of this. That when there was any indication that there was a boy to be born in a household, the police would come as soon as the child was born, they would rip it away, taking it before the umbilical cord could even be cut, ripping it away from the mother and tossing it, killing it immediately. And this was the conditions that they lived in. 1 year this would happen, then the next year it would not happen. Then the next year the boys would be killed. Then the next year they would stop. It alternated every year, every other year it would happen. The brother of Musa alayhi salam, Harun alayhi salam, was born in the year where there was no children to be killed. But then Musa alayhi salam had the unfortunate privilege, if you will, of being born in a time where the boys were to be killed. Now the mother of Musa alayhi salam hid her pregnancy as best as she could. She tried not to show. She wore heavy garments. She just tried to live her life in a way where nobody really knew. She hid and kept to herself. But eventually the time came where Musa alayhi salam was born. And when he was born, she was given instruction. She was given revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَى أَنْ إِرْضِعِيهِ. We told Musa alayhi salam's mother, we informed her that she should feed him. She should give him, suckle him. And when she did so, but when she got to a point where she was afraid that the police would come and they would take him and they would kill this innocent, beautiful child, when she had any inclination that this was to happen, she should take her child, put him into a basket, and put him in the river. Take him, put him into a basket, and send him down the river. You almost feel, hearing this, that I almost would rather take my chances with the police. Because at least in one instance, I'll be there. But in another, I have no control. I have no idea. The mother of Musa alayhi salam put him in that basket though. And she let him go downstream, where then Fir'aun unwittingly picked up the one child of all the dozens and dozens and hundreds of boys that he had killed. He unwittingly picks up the one who is the fulfillment to this dream that he has. And he is forced to, because of his wife's pleas, to raise this young boy up in his home. And because of this, in spite of the fact that he was born in this time, he is raised by the Pharaoh himself in the Pharaoh's home. He is still given the ability to nurse from his mother, to have a relationship with his mother. And as he gets older, the time comes where he is out in society, he is a man, and he sees someone from his own people, the Banu Israel, understanding where he comes from. He sees them in a fight with the people of Fir'aun's class. And he gets worried and he goes to try and break up this fight. And when he hits the man who is from Fir'aun's class, in spite of doing nothing that would have been extravagant or excessive, the man dies. And when the man dies, of course, Musa alayhi salam then has to hide. He has to run. And he is forced to flee from Egypt, the only place that he's ever known. And he flees to Madian, a nearby city. And he flees there and lives for a decade, where he marries, he has children, until when he has finally left his father-in-law's home. Some scholars say Shu'aib alayhi salam, when he has left his father-in-law's home, he ventures back towards the direction of Egypt, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals himself to him. Inni ana Allah fa'budni. I am Allah, worship me. Establish salah for my remembrance, he tells Musa alayhi salam. And Musa alayhi salam is so overcome by this, he is so fearful of his own inability that he asks Allah to give him assistance and aid through his brother. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them very simple directions. اذهبا إلى فرعون. Go to Fir'aun, إنه طغى. He's transgressed every single possible boundary that is acceptable. Musa alayhi salam arrives, and when he meets Fir'aun, and Fir'aun sees him and he's enraged that this man has come back. He escaped his clutches and he's come back now to him. But instead of saying, I'm here to submit myself or this, he says to Fir'aun, I am a messenger from Allah. Inni rasulun min rabbil alameen. I am a messenger from the one true God. You are not that God, Fir'aun. And I am here to take Banu Israel with me. And I've come, if you don't believe me, I've come with signs. In the interim, while Musa alayhi salam was gone, reflect on the gap in the story. That this is a decade where people, the Banu Israel in particular, the mu'mineen of the time, the believers of this time, were left under the clutches of the greatest tyrant to ever live. Ask yourself a question. Do you think anything improved for them? Do you think that things, because Musa alayhi salam left, became better for them? Do you think that because he had fled and Fir'aun realized that this was the guy he had raised in his own home, the Banu Israel, furthering his own stereotypes of their lowliness, do you think Fir'aun suddenly decided, let me take it easy on the Banu Israel? I'll be nice to them. I'll be kind to them. No. In fact, Fir'aun increased his oppression. And he increased the torture and the harm that he would inflict. In those times, there were people begging and calling out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There were people crying out, mothers begging for their children, fathers asking for protection for their families. But Musa alayhi salam had not yet come. And there's a very powerful lesson in this. You see, Musa alayhi salam spent a decade away, because this was the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was preparing him for what he would have to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have left Musa alayhi salam in Misr. He could have allowed him to grow up there. He could have allowed him to be someone who had become a resistance fighter, if you will. But instead, he sent Musa alayhi salam far away. And he trained him. And he taught him. And when he finally returned, Musa alayhi salam was no longer the man that he was when he left, but he was the man that was needed for that moment in front of Fir'aun. When he returned, he was no longer afraid of Fir'aun. And even to the extent we see the change in Musa alayhi salam, from when first Allah speaks to him and he says, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُوا قَوْلِي. He says, Ya Allah, I can't do this, I'm afraid. Open my chest, please, Ya Allah, and loosen the knot from my tongue, because by all accounts, Musa alayhi salam had some form of speech impediment. But then when he goes to Fir'aun, in spite of having asked, Haruna akhi, give me, ushdud li min ahli, give me some assistance from my family, my brother Harun, because huwa afsahu minni, he's more eloquent than me, he speaks better than me. In spite of this, when Musa alayhi salam stands in front of Fir'aun, he is the one saying, Inni rasulun min rabbil alamin. He is the one talking to Fir'aun. He is the one speaking directly to him. He is the one who is making the case. What this shows us, brothers and sisters, is a very simple reality. The times we live in right now, we ask ourselves, why are things the way they are? Why can't people do this and why can't people do that? Why can't Muslims be this? But just like the Banu Israel suffered while Musa alayhi salam was being prepared, we have to recognize that Allah's help is always close. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not leave His servants to simply rot. But He does sometimes ask them to be patient. Ista'inu billahi wasbiru. Seek help from Allah and just give it time. Have true, sincere sabr. Because there were people before you who called out, Mata nasrullah? When is the help of Allah coming? And Allah's response was simple. Ala inna nasrullahi qareeb. Allah's help is certainly nearby. Musa alayhi salam was prepared. And he eventually, as we know, led Banu Israel away from Fir'aun. He was the one who killed Fir'aun. But it didn't happen until he was ready. And similarly, when we ask ourselves, why is it we have to deal with this and this problem and that problem? Always remember that whatever solution it is that you seek, whatever aid it is that you seek, if it hasn't yet come from Allah, it's because it is being prepared in this moment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never send you a half-baked solution. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only send a solution in the right time, when it is the best solution for all involved. And when we can keep this in mind, even in the most difficult of days, we can understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His help will come. No matter how bad things get, no matter where things are. And if we remember this, brothers and sisters, we can have peace in our hearts in the most difficult days. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be patient. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to the truth. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم لسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. In difficult times, brothers and sisters, I want you to remember a few things. And the first is that understand that no matter what happens to you, no matter what happens to your brothers and sisters, there will be ultimate accountability with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah tells us in the Quran, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Don't you dare for a moment, Allah says, think that Allah is unaware of what wrongdoers do, of what oppressive people do. Don't you dare for a second think that. إِنَّمَا يُؤَخِّرُهُمْ لِيَوْمٍ تَشْخَصُ فِيهِ الْأَبْصَارُ. He only gives them respite. He only gives them a little bit of time until a day will come when those very same people who thought that they were kings, who thought that they were the ones who ruled the earth, who thought that they were invincible, those people will stare on in horror, Allah says, seeing the results of their actions. That day will come. Those today who try and say, there is no God, there is no accountability, wal-'iyadhu billah. The irony is that these very same people, they have no hope then for any oppressed individual who is killed. Think about it. For someone who tries to say that this is a simply meaningless world that exists with no one to govern it. Those people are also saying that if you're born in a bad situation and you die in a bad situation because of the actions of other people, well, too bad for you. But what we say is that, look, we seek justice in this dunya. We do our part individually to help those who are oppressed. But where there are limits, where we cannot do more, we leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know that when He takes accountability, that will be far greater than anything we could do in this dunya. That those who oppressed in this dunya will face a punishment far greater than any fruits they tasted in this world. Allah's accountability will be final and it will be firm. Never lose hope in that. Secondly, when people seek to do harm to us, when people seek to try and be belligerent or ignorant to us, they try to speak about things which they have no knowledge of. When they try to tell you that Islam is this or Islam is that, having read the something that is foolish in its ability to espouse, something that has no knowledge of Islam, those people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us very simple instructions. That those who are servants of the Most Merciful, إِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ, when the ignorant ones, the foolish ones speak to them, قَالُوا سَلَامًا, they just say salam. They just say peace. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. And a day will come where I will ask you, as Allah tells us in Surah Al-A'raf, the people of Jannah will call to the people of hellfire, that we have found what Allah promised us to be true. فَهَلْ وَجَدْتُمْ مَا وَعَدَ رَبُّكُمْ حَقًّا? So have you found what your Lord promised you to be true? And the answer will be yes. For those who oppressed, for those who did wrong, they will find what Allah promised them in the pages of this Quran in Jahannam. Don't have any fear of that. But don't cause yourself a problem. قَالُوا سَلَامًا, the servants of the Most Merciful, we follow the example that the Prophet ﷺ taught us in Mecca, in a society that was hostile to Islam. When people came to argue, people came to try and say this or say that. When Abu Jahl began to try and curse and speak to the Prophet ﷺ, he simply walked away. قَالُوا سَلَامًا, they just say peace. They leave it to that. They leave it to Allah. And lastly, remember that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help has not yet come, it is being prepared. Musa alayhi salam spent so long being prepared to be the right solution at the right time for Banu Israel. He was everything that they needed and more. And it didn't happen just because he woke up one day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepared him. So never lose hope in Allah and never fear that He's abandoned you. Because whatever solution you need, it will come at the time that's not right for you. Not what you think is right, but it'll come at the time that Allah knows is best. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of our deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us assistance in our difficult times. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free our brothers and sisters in oppression across the world. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروا يغفر لكم واتقوا يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا أقيموا الصلاة